We love to talk about community in African tech, but a single banner ad just proved that when $30 billion is on the line, the rivalry between Selar and Mainstack is anything but friendly. Meanwhile, Kenya is taking a hard stance on artificial intelligence, moving to criminalize unapproved high-risk AI deployment. It's raising a serious concern about regulation, innovation, and control. On the business front, Nigerian fintechs are finally dropping the startup tag to build full stack financial empires. This and more stories. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Tides Africa podcast. My name is Karen, coming to you from Kenya, and joining me is Kelvin. How are you doing today, Kelvin?
I'm doing well. It's a good day to be a creator in the African space. So I'm looking forward to this episode because we have some interesting stories to discuss.
Yeah, we have very different stories today from what we normally discuss. I think they have very new angles. So I'm looking forward to that. And we are starting with Seller versus Mainstack. And we are seeing what I would call a showdown. If you watched WWE, this is SmackDown between two organizations. The Lagos Mainstack, they host a landmark event called The Moment, and they were hosting it this year, 2026, from March the 13th to the 15th, to solidify their position as an operating system for the African creator economy. Then Seller pulls out a move and puts in billboards on the venue, very eye-catching billboards featuring their logo with taglines like "Create with intention," "Create what sells," ahead of the gathering, and it created an issue. Mainstack ended up complaining, and as if that wasn't enough, it so happens that Mainstack seems to have poached the CMO of Seller, and they announced it during this event, to which Seller responded and said, well, we fired him. And we're seeing I don't know what to call this. In the Roman Empire, I don't know whether we are, what was it called again? Gladiators fighting? But it's definitely fun to watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, it's fun to watch from the sidelines, but I don't think it will be fun to be in the midst of the chaos because it sounds like a lot of chaos. There were a lot of moving parts to the story. It's been some time we had a showdown like this, I'll say. Last year we had that between Paystack and Zap Africa, and it's taken like a full year to have another big chaos like this. And this time it's in the creator economy space. People are beginning to realize that there is a lot of money to be made, and that's why you can have some tension like this. I found it very fascinating, the move to like put billboards up at an event where your competitor is having their event. Is a cheeky move by Seller, but what I wonder is how the event center allowed it to fly, being that it's a competitor is having an event there. How would you allow those billboards to happen? A part of me is thinking that maybe someone at the event center also loves chaos like myself. I wanted to see what will happen. But yeah, Mainstack wasn't having any of that. They put a lot of pressure, and eventually the event center took the billboards down. And as far as the poaching concerns, one side is saying they let the CMO or the former CMO of Seller and now the new CMO of Mainstack left. And the other side is saying that he was fired. So I mean, it's a case of she said, he said. Although the CEO of Seller did post some evidence on X about, well, letting him go and said there's some coordination campaign going on against Seller. I wonder where it ends up. I think the marketing side of X last week, they were happy because it's been, it's been some time marketing Twitter and giving some chaos. So it was all fun and games, but I think when real money is involved and real market share is at stake, there's a lot more than just jokes on X.
First of all, it's good to know that you enjoy drama. We've learned something new about you today. I wonder if you're sure you're not in this event, you're one of the people who are coordinating this event. Do you not work for the venue? We need to investigate that. But I do think that it's also showing how much the creator economy in Africa is growing, to the point where the competition is beginning to grow. We're seeing organizations start to fight for market share. So I think that's an indicator that the economy is growing, and we're expecting it to keep growing. When you look at the numbers, there's promise of continued growth. I wonder what we can expect. Will we see some consolidations or acquisitions in the industry for companies that are seeking to serve this economy? Some interesting times ahead, I think, looking at the way these two competitors are behaving. Selar obviously is the older one in the market. They, I think, have a very solid customer base, over 2 million users. They position themselves quite differently from the way that Mainstack does. They are a robust tools that simplifies work. Mainstack looks at itself more as an operating system for digital entrepreneurs. They have a lot of different tools that they offer, like calendars and all that. I personally have looked at Selar. I like their product. As a Kenyan, I've thought about using them as opposed to something like Patreon or Substack that are not very fair to African creators, because we're not even able to monetize when you're on Substack, for example. I do think that it's a good indicator that, first of all, we're having people who are creating for us. Second of all, the market is growing to the point where competition is becoming this brutal. It's interesting that it has become personal, but I'm looking forward to seeing if we are going to see some acquisitions, some mergers coming in the future, new players walking into the industry. Very interested to see that.
Yeah, if anything, what the whole drama exposed me to was the other players in the space, because before the whole drama, I only knew Seller. Maybe because they are older, because I don't really operate in the creator economy space like that. But I've known about Seller for quite a number of years. But now I know about Mainstack, and we also saw a couple of other players, the Stooge and the Linkies, pop up throughout the conversations that were going on X during this whole drama. So now I know there are a couple of players in this space. We'll watch and see how it all boils down. There's plenty money to be made, and people are trying to make this money. So it should be interesting to see. Moving on, MTN has made a move to take control of IHS Towers in a $2.2 billion deal. MTN is basically trying to consolidate their telecom towers throughout their key markets. I mean, MTN has been making a number of moves. I've seen them making some fintech plays where they are building some of their own products, and also they are partnering with some existing fintechs to collaborate with them. But now they are facing their main business in this acquisition, and I think it's a thing of trying to create more streams of revenue, because when you have towers, you're not the only one that uses those towers in the telco space. Other people can rent some of your towers, and this creates another source of revenue for them. So I think it's an interesting play. IHS Towers is one of the biggest companies operating in this space. So it's a big play by MTN to acquire this company.
So first of all, we're seeing a reversal in strategy for MTN, because earlier, like most telecom operators, especially in Africa, we saw them separate their tower assets so that they could unlock capital, reduce capital intensity, because ownership of tower infrastructure is quite capital intensive. So we saw that separation. Now we're seeing the group start to reintegrate those assets, which is a very interesting play from this telecom giant. I think they're shifting from just being a service provider to being an infrastructure owner. If you look at history and how wealth is built, I think wealth has always been built on being the owner of assets, of infrastructure. And then making money through those assets. So that's clearly the move that they're making. This is going to reduce their reliance on third-party tower companies. It's going to improve their margins long term. It's a very big deal, $2.2 billion. That's crazy, but I think it gives them more control over their network, especially their towers, which is critical for mobile connectivity. And as we have been talking over the last year or so on this podcast, mobile connectivity, internet connectivity is one of the backbones of the economy and the growth of the African economies. So definitely a very good move. One red flag for me would be this might reduce competition if too much of the infrastructure within the industry is centralized. But I do think it mirrors how tech giants may start to move in terms of integrating and owning more of their assets. Based on this, I'm interested to see what other large telecom giants like Safaricom in Kenya will do in that line. I actually did not check if Safaricom has at any point moved in that line. Obviously, they have quite a few towers in Kenya. So waiting to see if this is a move that more will make, because especially of that red flag that I had mentioned in terms of it being too centralized, where only a few organizations own majority of the infrastructure.
I think, especially in Nigeria, telecom companies tend to collaborate quite often. Funny enough, even though they are competitors, they tend to collaborate. They tend to share things like towers and other infrastructure between themselves. So maybe not so much in Nigeria, where you're afraid of a lack of competition. I think in Nigeria we have Glo and Airtel that are quite competitive, even though MTN is significantly larger. But yeah, interesting play from MTN to begin to consolidate and try to create more capital for themselves, unlock more capital for themselves. And we'll see.
Absolutely. Still in Nigeria, we're seeing fintechs within that country begin to play a very different game. They started by unbundling the products that they offer, and now we're seeing them rebundling and becoming full stack financial services. As competition rises, they're moving towards more broader services. And I think we have discussed this previously on one of the episodes, actually multiple episodes, where we're seeing financial fintechs move from just one service, for example, payments or lending or cards, and now they're having the capability to offer a suite of services. At the beginning, because they needed to compete with banks, traditional banking, and that is an industry that has been there for centuries, they were not able to compete with them if they offered all the services that they offer. So most of the fintechs that began would pick one service, get really good at providing it, ensure that they build customer trust, they have enough volume in terms of transactions and customers. And now that that has been solidified and they have solidified themselves as brands, we're seeing them begin to offer a lot more services. And I will say this as I start, I think it's not just in Nigeria. We're seeing the same happening in Kenya. And I do think it's a strategy where you start by unbundling and being very good at one, and then you rebundle and you begin to offer more services once you have established your processes, you've established your brand, you understand how to do what you do very well, and now you have the resources to diversify. I would really like to hear your thoughts on this, Kelvin, because I know you have a lot of interest in the fintech space. You're a user of a lot of fintechs, and I do think you're very knowledgeable on the industry. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
They have basically become banks. I know I've been thinking about it for a while. A lot of these fintechs are beginning to look more like banks, just that they mainly operate in the digital space. A lot of the time, you don't go to their offices to make complaints. You make the complaints online, even on social media, and they respond to you, which is quite cool. But they are now beginning to offer as much services as the banks. And we're seeing a number of them in Nigeria, especially beginning to get a microfinance bank license, which, well, as the name implies, allows you to offer banking services. And it makes sense, like, why they are doing this. At the beginning, you're trying to do one thing and do one thing very well. and then gradually over time you expand. Because there are a number of players in the space, it's hard to just rely on transaction fees alone. So we are seeing these fintechs make more of a play into offering other services to improve their revenue model and capture more portions of the market. The other thing at play, I think, is the reduced funding at the moment. We have talked about it over the last 2 years or 3 years at this point. There has been a shortage of capital from the highs of 2021 and 2022. You need to think about more ways to get revenue, and I think that's also why we are beginning to see more of a rebundling trend going on. Of course, part of it is also so they can expand to other countries and scale. So it definitely makes sense. There are benefits to rebundling, but there are also some risk involved. As you said at the beginning, you want to do one thing and do it well. But as you start to do more things, there is that risk of losing focus because you're spreading yourself on multiple fronts. There is that potential of losing focus. And of course, as you're operating in multiple spaces, it increases the complexity of your product. So making sure that you're maintaining a good user experience across your product offerings is very important. Africa is a very interesting continent, and I think there are a lot of opportunities, and these fintechs are just trying to take advantage of those opportunities and wish them all the best.
And I think one of the things that they will have to ask themselves, even as they go into this, is do we have the right infrastructure, the right team, the right strategy to do this profitably? Because it's very easy to expand and then realize that you've made a mistake somewhere in the middle. Perhaps you do not have all the right ingredients to pursue a wider variety of products, but you were very good at pursuing that one product. So I think that's a question that any founder needs to ask themselves before they diversify. Do I have the right infrastructure? Do I have the right team? Do I have the right strategy? Are my customers ready for this diversification?
Absolutely. Moving on, last week we talked about the decision for Canal Plus to shut down Showmax, the potential fallout that could come from that. And this week we are seeing one of those fallouts. So the South African Parliament has stepped in to investigate, especially with job losses and how this shutdown could affect the broader creative industry, because I mean, Showmax is one of the biggest players in the entertainment space in Africa. So they are stepping in to investigate that basically Canal Plus doesn't go back on the terms of the deal. Part of the terms of the deal was to make sure that they find ways to ensure that the African entertainment space doesn't just end up in the hands of, well, foreign influence. I think South Africa has that thing where they try to protect the local talent. And one thing that comes to my mind as I'm thinking about this story is the Starlink story that we talked a lot about last year. Starlink was trying to get into South Africa, but South Africa has this rule where they have to own 30% of the company if it's a foreign company. And that caused some delays in their launching in South Africa. So they are very big on protecting local talents, local industries, and making sure that these things don't collapse. So they are basically investigating the shutdown to make sure that the entertainment industry doesn't collapse. And I think it's quite good. Some scrutiny when it comes to these type of deals. You need some regulatory scrutiny. And I am waiting on this particular story to see how things pan out, because it could affect a lot of African productions. So I'm definitely watching this story.
Yeah, I agree. I think Showmax did a really good job at highlighting African talent, highlighting African content. You could see that South African content was starting to gain global recognition. same as Nigerian content. You can see that even through the fact that a lot of Nigerian actors, a lot of South African actors are moving into the global space. And I think Showmax had a big part to play in that. It was creating an ecosystem for creatives within the media space, from writers to actors to producers, you name it. And it's left a big gap. Obviously, we are seeing this is becoming a trend where people are losing jobs in the masses at the moment for different reasons, from the economy to AI. We're seeing more people trying to run lean organizations, and that's going to create panic. I love what the government has decided to do to try and see what is happening. Can they protect their people? Can they protect this industry that has been booming and growing? Showmax closing, what does it mean for production within the country, but also even the continent as a whole? How does that affect what we consume and also what we produce going forward? So it's a worrying trend. Obviously, we talked about it being sad, waiting to see what happens, obviously wanting to protect us from being over influenced. I always say if we want to tell authentic African stories, we have to be the ones to tell them ourselves. Because if we wait for someone else to tell a story, they'll always tell it from the wrong perspective. They will never understand what African story is, how it affects us, what it means to be African. No one else can tell that story the way we can. And the more we consume and create our own stories, the more we can protect the authenticity of our culture, of our identity. So I don't know what else to add to this. I'm just waiting to see what happens to the African story moving forward.
Yeah, I share your worries because this feels like the last big player in that space that is shutting down. We had Iroko TV at some point, and even Netflix and Amazon Prime, the global giants. At some point, they were giving money to local productions to make movies, but that has slowed down significantly over the last year, and now Showmax is shutting down. So it feels like all of the major players that encourage local production are beginning to leave the space. I just remembered that we talked about Cover TV, I think, that started last year to make a push for local production. So maybe they can make some headway in this space. But beyond that, it's a worrying trend at the moment.
Moving on to AI, Kenya is moving to criminalize unapproved high risk AI deployment through a draft called the Artificial Intelligence Bill of 2026. It's been sponsored by someone who's my namesake. I have to say, I'm not very proud to share my name with her. But she's the Senator Karen Nyamo. She's a very controversial individual. She has proposed that a person should not develop, deploy, or operate a high risk artificial intelligence system without the approval of the commission, sorry, and they've introduced fines of up to 5 million Kenya shillings or jail term of up to 3 years. They've also suggested that there should be an AI commissioner with powers to classify systems, grant approvals, and maintain a public register of AI tools that are being used to allow the regulator to inspect the system's data and related records and widen oversight into how products are being built and deployed. I want to hear your thoughts before I give mine.
Interesting. I paused as well when I saw this story because I believe that you can make arguments for and against the bill. For the bill, you would say that there needs to be some sort of regulation around how we are developing these AI tools because they do depend on large amounts of data from people, and there is always that room to create bias depending on the type of training data you give these tools. Once there is bias, that could lead to exclusion and things along those lines. But then a bill like this could cripple innovation because when you say you want to create a bill like this for high risk AI systems, how do you define high risk? And the punishment for not reporting these AI systems before deploying them are quite severe. So it could end up stifling innovation. Who wants to be building something AI when you know that you could end up in prison, and when there isn't a clear definition for what is considered high risk? You could speculate and say things around fintech, health, maybe education, but it's not really clear what high risk is. So I'm still like, it isn't something that is now signed into law, but I will be very skeptical about it. I think it needs to go through more refinements to make sense, because at the moment it just looks like a bill that would cripple innovation.
I think those are very brilliant insights, very true. First of all, what is high risk? Define high risk. The second thing I think is criminalization is a bit extreme. Sending people to jail, I find that to be a bit extreme. I am all for fines, like major fines. When it comes to jail time, I think there has to be very specific, clear regulations on what would cause jail time, and the crime has to fit the punishment, because I also think it might, as you said, stifle innovation in the country. Now, Kenya is the first country to come up with this kind of bill to criminalize certain habits in the AI ecosystem. Do I think that there needs to be governance and oversight? Absolutely 100%, because I do think there's a lot of abuse within that space because regulations are not clear. And that's not just a Kenya problem. I think that's a global problem. We're still trying to figure out the ethics with AI, even with tech as a whole. There's a lot of gray areas when it comes to ethics in the tech world. What should we build? Do we have to build it? Is it necessary? Is what we are building what we ought to be building? I recently did an article on is ought problem when it comes to the tech space. Just because we can build it, does it mean we should build it because we have the technical capacity? So there are a lot of questions regarding the ethics and governance of the whole tech industry, I think, but AI in specific. So, yes, we definitely need better regulations, better policies, better oversight. But we have to be careful not to lump everything up. And as you have said, we have to be very precise with the way that we craft any kind of regulation so that we don't stifle or create a bottleneck for innovators, especially because this is where the world is going. We've already gone past the point of we can stop it. It's already overtaken us. So we do not want to be behind as a country because of the regulations that we have. We want to be able to play on an even playing field with other countries around the world. Kenya, for example, a lot of us are working online. A lot of us are working with AI. A lot of us are working with countries outside of the continent that are using AI. So there's so many things that are involved in this. And I do think that we want to stay competitive while creating regulations that protect our people. But I do think right now it's a very vague draft, in my opinion. I probably should look at it better. But I do think that there are quite a number of risks if it is not carefully crafted. That would be my opinion. I think we are in agreement.
Yeah.
We need to find a topic where we fight and don't agree.
Yeah, that would be fun. But that will be for another episode, I believe, because we have come to the end of this one. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Tech Tides Africa podcast. Remember, leave a comment or share with your friends. We'll see you next Thursday at the same time and place you get your podcast. Until then, stay well.